Yeah, so I've been working in the games industry for 15 years, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I met some friends who run a shop called Because We Can in Oakland. And the reason I found out about them is that they built the interiors of several game studios inside of San Francisco. Most notably, Three Rings, which was a 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea Nautilus-themed office. So they had tentacles, and the interior looked like the interior of a submarine. And they did this all in a shop bot. And so I started talking to them, wanting to know more and more about their workflow. And I got really upset because they were doing things by hand that had been solved in the games industry already 10 years ago. And I said, Jeffrey, I can spend some time and solve this problem for you. I came back 2 weeks later, and then the thing that used to take them 4 days now takes them 5 minutes. And that opened my eyes to the fact that the AEC industry has, in some ways, been relatively isolated from a lot of the technology change that's happened elsewhere in other industries. And the interesting thing for me, about the AEC space is not that the technology challenges of the industry are hard. The more interesting thing to me that I've learned about the AEC space is that the political and legal environment of the AEC space is such a minefield. And if you're a technologist wanting to build stuff for the AEC space, the number one thing you're going to face is not, can you solve the technology problem? You probably can. It's actually, can you get the organizations and the people involved to actually use your solution? So there are really four, actually, since we've only got a few people in the audience, so what are your roles? Are you a technologist? Who's a technologist here? All right. AEC space, student? No? Okay, so the crazy thing is that the folks in the AEC industry are not typically trained in a lot of technologies, and it's a very risk-adverse industry. So if you come to them with a technology and say, here's this magical thing, if you use it, your life will be easy, you're going to be met with skepticism. So just to quickly run down these four categories of people in the AEC space. So you've got owners. These are the people who actually spend the money to buy buildings. They are really concerned with the end product. In some regards, they don't care how it gets built. They just want a building. Then you've got your architects, engineers, and construction folks. Now, the interesting thing about the architects is that the way the architecture industry works is you go to architecture school to get your license, and you are pumped up with visions of being the next Frank Gehry. They talk to you about the built environment and how you are personally going to change humanity's interaction with buildings. And then you graduate and you go work at a big firm and you do drafting for bathrooms for ADA handicap compliance for 10 years. If you're under 40 years old, you are considered a young gun in the industry. And you compare this to video game industry, where I'm 37 and I'm an old man. I mean, I've got executive plumage here. You know, like I'm old for the games industry, whereas in the architecture world, I'm super young. The other interesting thing about the architecture world is that the business model traditionally has been, you have your Starchitect, your Frank Gehry or other high-profile names. They then get the jobs, and then you've got a small army of folks who are freshly minted architecture grads who work for relatively little pay, and they do that for decades before they get the chance to build their own building. So it's an interesting, it's almost an apprenticeship model. And so one of the things that this does, though, is that the folks at the top of the industry often the firms are still using the same technology, or many of the same technologies, that they did when that senior partner first started at the firm. That there hasn't been the same level of rapid technological change and adoption in this industry. And that's in part because of all the legal issues around buildings. And I'll get to that in a bit. Then you have engineers, structural engineers, folks, very, very formalized schooling, very concerned with, will the building fall down, will it kill people, And it's their job to understand that specific problem set. And they get used often as hired guns for projects to come in and solve this particular problem or analyze this part of the building. And then you get to the construction folks. Now the construction folks are, by definition, only concerned with what is there. If your architects are the people who have the grand idea and the grand theory, and are willing to entertain any theory as long as it's amazing and cool, the construction folks, on the other hand, they want to build the building in as little of time as possible, and they don't necessarily care about grand ideas. They care about what gets the job done. And this is when you start talking about what is something field ready? If you go to someone and you show them a minimum viable product for a technology, and you show it to a construction person, their job is to walk into a room and say, oh, we're missing 3 studs on that wall. They're trained to find the thing that is supposed to be there but isn't. So showing them a piece of technology which has gaping holes in it, and saying, well, someday it will do X, and someday it will do Y. And they're going to say, well, does it do X now? No. And so demoing MVPs to these folks is very difficult. It's a challenging process. You actually have to have a product which is far more polished than you would in, say, the consumer industry. So this gets to another important point, which is about money. So I've talked to a couple architects, and two of them have said to me, totally independently, we're idea rich and cash poor. Architects love the big idea. They love the grand taxonomy. They love grand theories of unified architecture. Architecture firms don't actually have that much money. Profit margins are often between 1% and 5% for mid-large scale architecture firms. Now, if you've got $1 billion building, that's a lot of money, but in the video game industry, I mean, we usually have 50% ROI on our investment, if not higher. Construction firms have better rates of profitability, but they're still nowhere near as profitable as, say, traditional pure software companies. And what this means is that these folks don't have tremendous amounts of cash to throw around for dedicated technology R&D departments. So one of the big political battles you're going to have to fight to sell a piece of technology to a firm is they may not have internally bought into the idea that they can build or they can buy tools from external vendors to solve specific problems and plot them into an existing tool chain that's constantly changing. They may have a vision of, well, these are the tools we're going to use for the next 4 years, and it's not going to change. So trying to sell them something that doesn't fit into their existing paradigm of software usage is a really hard sell. Another key point about the AEC industry is how litigious it is. They joked about it last night, where it's bid, build, and then sue. All those four components, the owner and the architects, engineers, and construction folks, they all have contracts with each other, if they're separate firms, that determine to a large extent the terms, the eventual lawsuits they're all going to file against each other. So whenever you're going into a situation and saying, hey, I've got this tool that will help you change how you do your work, one of their first questions is going to be, what does this do to my legal exposure? And then on top of that, how does this integrate with the regulatory environment? You could have the most amazing web-based 3D modeling system for your building. It's fully integrated with your construction pipeline and your logistics chain, et cetera, but your planning office might require 2D blueprints. So for me, it was a shock. I was used to having to deal with Apple or Microsoft or Sony for compliance checking for the latest game. I wasn't used to having to deal with laws that were written before I was born, dealing with the product. So the folks in the AEC space are very concerned with not only the law in terms of how they get sued, but also the regulatory environment in terms of what they can do. And those two tie together quite tightly, because it was a shock to me to learn that the architect of record, the person who actually signs those blueprints that go to the planning board, they are personally liable for those blueprints, not their firm. So there's a tremendous amount of justified conservatism in the industry because it's their butt on the line. And this gets to my final point, and I talked a little bit about this already, but the tools if you're going to develop technology for the AEC space, it has to be quote-unquote field ready. One of the first questions people are going to ask is, can I take it to the field? Will it handle getting money? How does it handle an environment where there is no wireless? How does it handle an environment where I've got a crappy machine in the trailer on the job site? How does it handle a job site where I'm legally not allowed to put any data related to this project on the internet? If you're dealing with court buildings, if you're dealing with military installations, buildings with security issues, in many cases, the contracts that are signed for those buildings limit very severely where the data lives and can live and who can have access to it. And so, if you got this great solution which lets anyone with a phone log in and log issues on this building and see the updated status of the building, you may not legally be able to do that for some of these projects unless you actually build out your own data center and you have legally binding restrictions on who has access to that data center. So it's a tough and thorny issue. And the best advice I can give is, if you want to be a technologist who moves into the AEC space, find a partner who has already done a lot of work in the space. It's very much a pedigree and a handshake business. If you come in with a turnkey solution that works, but you've never worked on a building before, you're probably going to get laughed out the door. Case actually did a fantastic job. They've been traditionally working with architects, and they have recently started to work with construction folks. So they hired Tyler Goss from Turner Construction to help head up their construction effort. And part of the reason why this is so smart is that Tyler has pre-existing relationships with all of these construction firms around the nation and the world. And he brings instant credibility to Case's tools and technology that they wouldn't otherwise have had. So when you're building something, and often, and Scott mentioned in the morning, that sometimes technologists come to the AEC space, they say, look, I have a hammer, and I can see a couple nails you got. You really want to make them feel as though they're bought into the solution, and that someone from within their own industry is advocating for you. It's not good for me to say, hey, I've got a great hammer. You want Bob, who worked with them on the last construction project, to say, hey, I got this new hammer, and it's way better than our old hammer. So, in terms of super high level, that's what I think technologists need to be able to do to break into the AEC space. As the AEC space slowly turns to realizing how technology can be a force multiplier for their teams, I think building tools and selling tools to the industry will become easier and easier. But right now, it's pretty damn hard. And as long as companies like Autodesk and others, rightfully so, build one tool which they want to have used from end to end, it's not going to be as easy to have a tool chain with many small parts which you can replace with something you built. So I would highly recommend that you all network like crazy at this event. A lot of the people here who are from the AEC space are the ones who are actually doing amazing work in terms of technological innovation in the space. These are the folks who are going to be your entry into those companies, who can introduce you to the decision makers, who then can write the checks to actually use the technology. So, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you.